of decadence regarded them as the epitome of rock star glamour. Now it's time to examine the legend. Tony Sanchez has written a rather remarkable book called Up and Down with the Rolling Stones. It's the revealing upfront story of the Stones from the early days when Sanchez first met Brian Jones and became the Stones' personal pusher. Later, Sanchez became Keith Richards' personal assistant and witnessed the life these superstars led firsthand. But no one can exist in the midst of the rock and roll lifestyle without being affected. The powerful influence of the Stones was too much for Sanchez to resist. He, too, became a junkie. The Stones' heavy involvement with hard drugs came to the public's attention with Keith Richards' bust here in Toronto. It was a sort of climax to a scene that had been going on for years. I asked Sanchez how the Stones got hooked.
It started like, as I said, with smoke and then pet pills, keeping awake while we were recording, not me, but them. And then acid when that came fashionable in the mid-60s. And in England, I think we started coke before the American people did, late 68. And then when you're into sort of snorting a lot of stuff all the time, and we used to snort even things like barbiturates if we ran out of coke, just something to snort. And when somebody turned up with some heroin or smack, we turned it down for quite a while. We said no, but one day you've got to do something, so we just took it. And we liked it. It was very nice then. Of course, a few years later, we realized that we were hooked. It takes sort of quite a long time before you realize, or you admit to yourself that you're hooked. And with people like Keith having all the money that he does, as long as you've got the money, you can buy it. What happened to me was that I ran out of money. And it wasn't as easy for me as it is for Keith to just carry on buying. And even for him, sometimes it's a bit difficult.
You thought of yourselves as sophisticated junkies.
Yeah, well, you know, even after 6 years, we were addicts, but we thought ourselves differently. We didn't think ourselves as street junkies. We thought, oh, you know, we're a different class. We don't hit the roads and ask dealers. You know, it's all taken care of. You know, it's brought to our house, and you carry it in gold boxes and gold snorters. And so when everybody said to me, "Are you a junkie?" I said, "No, not me," and them. You know, I mean. Even then, you sort of make excuses. You say, "I've got the flu today. I don't feel well because I've got a cold." Or, but it's when you run out of it, and 2 days later you still haven't got any, and you can't get out of bed. You ring somebody up and say, "Hey, what's wrong with me?" And they tell you, you know, you're a hook boy.
What finally happened with you and the Stones? Why the breakup?
Well, I was in a spot. I needed money just to keep my habit going, which was a $300 or $400 a day habit. And any money that I had saved up went a matter of 2 or 3 months. And when I asked for help, and I could only turn to somebody that I knew, or I thought could help me, was someone like Keith, you know, I'm going to ask him for an advance. He turned me down. And I couldn't believe it, so I started selling off all my possessions, my clothes, everything. And at the end, I just had nobody to turn to, and I went away to a clinic. And when I was halfway clean, I realized it was the best thing to do, just to keep away from them. And I've kept away.
This is the free concert for the blind that the Stones put on in Oshawa. It was Richards' penalty for possession of heroin. Many said Richards got off easy. Part of the reason the court was so lenient was that prior to his hearing, Richards had been through a withdrawal program at a New York clinic. In his book, Sanchez recounts the first time the Stones got busted. It happened at Keith's country mansion, Redlands, shortly after the Stones and their entourage, which included Marianne Faithfull, had taken off for their first acid trip. Mick and Keith had to spend the night in jail. What was their reaction?
Well, Keith, he loved it, you know. We didn't love it, but when he came out, he told me that he got in there and all the convicts there, but they were all in remand. They're not sort of real criminals. They're just people that were going there like they did for a night or two. They started rattling their doors, and earlier on they'd been playing a Stones record on the radio. And they were all cheering him, you know, as a rebel, and he sort of dug it. Mick, they took him to another place called the Scrubs, we call it the Scrubs. And he sort of cried a little bit, you know. He couldn't have taken it.
What kind of woman do you think was attracted to the Stones? What kind of mentality did it take?
women like Anita Pallenberg, for example, it seems like she just sort of played switchies for a while. Started off with Brian Jones.
Then with Keith, and then back to Brian, and maybe with Mick. I think she had a bit of a power over anybody she went with. And when she sort of left Brian, although sometimes I say that Keith took her away, it was a bit of both. She left him because Brian wasn't capable of doing anything no more. And Keith was the next guy up the ladder. And she picked him. And that's probably the end of Brian, you know. He couldn't take it, just going back to the studios whenever they were recording and seeing them together, sort of giggling at him, you know. By then he couldn't even play anything, couldn't play a note.
What finally happened? Does anybody know the real story behind Brian Jones' death?
Nobody ever know the story. I've got my views on it. Even then, it's... And the boys, we all thought that when Brian died, it was... it just wasn't possible, you know. He had like a 24-hour-a-day staff with him all the time, from doctor's orders, you know, that he couldn't be left alone. And he was on Valium and tranquilizers. He was off drugs, but he had legit drugs from the doctors, which was as bad, really. And he was drinking a lot. And somebody left him for literally a couple of minutes. When they came back, he was in the pool drowned, which, you know, it's like impossible to believe.
So you think perhaps someone wanted to see him dead?
I don't know. I think it's very funny.
Oh, really? How did everybody else react to it?
Shocked. Well, the reaction they got at first was, oh, it's only Brian, you know. From a few people. Which shocked me a bit, you know, because they thought when we first got the news that a stone had been found drowned, somebody thought it was Mick. And if Mick had been the one, then the Stones would have probably been finished, because who could they replace, you know? They couldn't replace Mick Jagger. Brian Jones couldn't play anyway then. He wasn't in the band no more, so he could be replaced. And that sort of shook me up a bit, you know, when somebody said, oh, it's only Brian. Death. It was sad that they went on with it, because they wanted to cancel it. A few people did anyway. And they hired the English Hells Angels, which were pretty naive guys, you know. They work between 8 and 5, and they go back in the evening, they put leather jackets on, comb their hair differently. They haven't even got motorbikes. They just go out and terrorize people. And when they came to LA, I think it was Jerry Garcia sort of suggested that they should do the same thing. So it was a good idea until it happened. And then they realized that they had no control at all over not just the crowd, but even over the Hells Angels. I mean, they were terrified for their own lives. It's probably the first time that Mick's ever been afraid on stage, although a lot of times people said they were going to kill him while he was on stage or assassinate him.
But I heard he didn't even realize how dangerous it was until he saw the film.
He didn't realize until 6 months later, till we got the movie back, and we were screening it in Wardour Street, and the guy nearly fainted. Not at what was going on, at himself. You know, I mean, he was looking at himself more than anybody in the movie. I mean, Keith was looking at himself, and Mick was looking at himself, and when he saw himself, how he reacted. I mean, even, I mean, he couldn't control the crowd. Keith tried to, and he couldn't. He said if the crowd didn't cool down or something, he was going to just walk off. And one of the angels came up and said, you do what, you know, we'll beat you up or whatever. And they just went on and done it.
Keith asked you to kill somebody for him once, didn't
Well, sort of, yeah.
he? Sort of, yeah? Well, what was the situation?
Uptight with somebody, really. I mean, I wouldn't have blamed him, because we believed this guy had set an eater up in Jamaica. She got busted. She got slung in prison. She was raped. She was beaten up. And then she was deported. And on top of that, a bribe was paid to let Anita get out of Jamaica. And then we found out the guy that paid the bribe was the guy who set it all up. So when the guy was coming to London to collect the money that he'd paid out, Keith said, right, now we'll get him. And he sort of said to me, could I do something about it? And I said, well, you know, anything could be done for money. And I didn't really think he was going to take it seriously. And he said, that's what he wanted. He said, and you can keep the money. So I said, okay, I'll think of something. But that went away and I thought, wow, forget it.
Do you think maybe you lived vicariously through them? Did you ever fancy yourself a rock and roll star?
For a few years, I had sort of ideas of becoming the next Rolling Stone, you know. I even got Keith to give me guitar lessons, and I had my own little dream of, you know, I used to jam with them sometimes. I play a little bit guitar. So I had my little dream on my